Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Constance Wrigley-Thomas and I am the Executive Director of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology. On behalf of CIFST and our partners at Food in Canada, Canada's only national food and beverage processing magazine, we are proud to bring you the second in a series of regular webinars that will give you access to some really great speakers who will provide great content that informs and inspires. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, including today's keynote. If you want some more information, please check our website for details on all of our future webinars. If you are a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. Today's topic is From Crisis Communications to Marketing During COVID-19 with Warren Weeks, and I think it's a very timely topic. But before we kick off today's session, I want to mention that if you have any questions, you can write them in the question box and I will moderate any questions at the end and our speaker will attempt to answer them before the end of the webinar. I would now like to introduce today's speaker. Warren Weeks sold his first newspaper to his grandmother at the age of 5. He was Wayne Gretzky's PR handler for a day in 1998. And in 2010, he started the viral social media campaign to get former NHL coach Pat Burns into the Hockey Hall of Fame. For the past 25 years, he has helped leaders at hundreds of companies to communicate more effectively. Ladies and gentlemen, Warren Weeks.
Thanks very much, Constance. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for having me here and for allowing me into your day. Hopefully we have something that will be of value to you as you run your business and try to communicate. I hope everybody's doing well health-wise in these, I'm not going to say unprecedented times because I'm actually sick of that term right now, but they're certainly interesting and somewhat crazy times. I realize also that a lot of the biggest issues a lot of the individuals have on the phone or on the webinar today are going to be operational in nature. And those are the same for my business as well. So I realize that that's really the big burning issue right now. But communications to me is a pretty close second, whether it comes, whether you're talking about crisis management in terms of like how do we communicate with people during this crisis situation, or from a marketing situation, you know, what's the appropriate thing to do? Should we be selling? How should we be selling? Understanding that all of us are in business. So I have a little prepared spiel I'm going to go through. We're going to talk about the crisis piece first. We're going to talk about the marketing piece second. I've got some examples that I want to show you in there to keep it hopefully as interesting as possible. But I really do want to spend some time at the end answering questions. So if you have any questions, please fire those along. I want to say thanks to the folks who did send some in early through the poll, and I'll try to answer those as we go through the day as well. But any questions you have, please send those in, and I'll try to do those in rapid fire at the end. So this to me, I saw this cartoon the other day, and this to me was one of the best images that I've seen so far when it comes to this whole pandemic and how a lot of us are probably feeling. Obviously, the healthcare workers are on the front lines of this, but everybody's being impacted by it. And I thought I wanted to share that just as an image to get across. So it's funny, you know, I do these keynote talks. I used to do them, I guess, when we were able to get gather in person. I would ask the audience members, raise your hands if your organization has a crisis management plan in place and it's up to date and you know where it is. And I would look for show of hands, and we're talking about rooms of like 100, 200, 300 people. And the highest number of hands I ever saw raised was 6. And so to me, I've known for years that we've had an issue from a crisis management standpoint in that the biggest crisis management strategy that most organizations have is hope. Like, we hope it doesn't happen to us. And you know, nobody saw something like of this magnitude coming that's going to affect every company. So I would say over the course of a given decade, of those 100 or 200 people in that room, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of them would have been hit with an organizational crisis. And here you have a situation where everybody is. So we're all sort of in the same boat, and we all have our own priorities. But there's a lot of examples of what not to do, and I'm sure you've seen those in the news, of what not to do from a communication standpoint when it comes to communication, social media, internal, external, marketing, sales, and all that. So we're going to talk about some of that today. From a crisis management standpoint, if I can only share one thought with you, it would be this. And I really, really, really firmly believe this, that 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, it's not so much the circumstances of the thing that took place, and in this case, the pandemic situation that everybody's going through. Obviously, we're going to remember that, but when it comes to your organization and your brand and your reputation, the thing that people are going to remember more is how you carried yourself, how you handled the situation, how you communicated. And we're seeing that take place with a lot of politicians and companies. And I just want to make sure that everyone on the line here today ends up on the right side of history, because when we're impacted by a crisis, there's this little part of our brain called the amygdala. They call it the reptilian part of our brain. And it's been there for many, many, many years. And in a crisis situation, we get into what I call fight or flight mode. And so we have executives who are otherwise very intelligent and very empathetic and very caring and very strategic, but we get into a crisis situation and suddenly we have this tunnel vision where you're not using all of your brain, to put it frankly. And so you have a lot of otherwise intelligent people making poor decisions. And so I think I can prove this to you by just mentioning a few companies' names. So when I mention the following companies' names, what is the first gut reaction that you have? United Airlines. Are you liking them or are you not liking them? Boeing, NASA, Maple Leaf Foods, Tylenol. You start mentioning names, and I can keep going down the list, but people have a visceral reaction, and all of those companies that I've mentioned have dealt with a massive crisis, like a very high profile crisis, and they were all very, very bad. But the companies handled them in significantly different ways, and I really believe that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're making the right decisions as we are dealing with this crisis situation. So. I always like to start by talking about the difference between an issue and a crisis. Like, we all have issues that we're dealing with, especially in the association space, in the manufacturing space, in the operational space. Every organization has issues. And to me, this is what an issue feels like. It's like a ship with some clouds on the horizon, and we need to be aware of what we do, but we've got some different options. To me, this is what a crisis feels like. To me, this is a really visceral portrayal or illustration of what a crisis situation feels like. And that's what we're in right now. So make no mistake about it. Every organization is in crisis mode at the same time, probably the first time that this has happened in all of our lifetimes. And so I want to make sure that as decisions are being made and as we are communicating, and keep in mind, we're communicating in a way that this stuff is going to be on social media. It's going to be searchable and accessible forever, not to add any additional pressure, but I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So one of the first things I want to get across is that and this goes to one of the comments that we had yesterday. It's like, when do you say something and when do you not? And when it comes to a crisis situation, I'm very aware that the story won't just go away on its own. And I go back to that fight or flight example of, trying to, and I'm going to get into an example of this in a moment with Pusateri's, the sort of upscale grocery chain in the greater Toronto area. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it, but they had a bit of a run-in with some sort of quote unquote price gouging a few weeks ago. And the way they handled it was basically this. They gave a very lame apology, and then they kind of went away and they pulled their Twitter page down. And I checked yesterday and their Twitter page is still down. This is almost a month later. So I want you to understand that if your organization is directly faced with a crisis, you don't want to keep your head in the sand and hope it blows over. I would always tell people, and I ask people, what's the best example of crisis management you can remember in Canadian history? And everyone says Maple Leaf Foods. And then I say, okay, what was the second best? And I have yet to have anyone give me another example, because it was such a great example. But one of the things they did is they got out in front of the story. They posted a 1-minute, 6-second video, and this is in 2008 when video wasn't everywhere. And they were having daily updates. They were talking to the press. They apologized. And so to take a leadership position and to communicate that is going to be very, very important. I would love to take credit for this line, but this is actually a line from a woman in Montreal. Her name's Melissa Agnes. She's a crisis management, crisis communications expert. If you're looking to do some reading, I think everyone's got a little bit of extra time on their hands these days, and probably running out of Netflix shows if you've watched Tiger King already. There's a great book called Crisis Ready, and it came out about a year ago. I've read it, and I know Melissa, and she's very, very good at this. But this is a great line. If you don't own the crisis will own you. So understanding that just waiting for it to blow over or seeing how things go is not going to be a great strategy down the road. one of the first things you want to do, and again, I could talk for an hour about each of these, and we're just trying to quickly go over. And so if you have any questions about any of them, please let me know and we can answer those as we go. One of the first things you need to do right out of the gate is to make sure that you let people know that you're on it. Like, so I don't know about you, but personally, when I see that an organization's dealing with a crisis, one of the first things I do is I go to their Twitter page, and I want to see how are they communicating. I often joke with people when an organization is dealing with a crisis, I become like Simon Cowell from American Idol. And I'm sitting there sort of harshly judging the organization and the spokesperson and what are they saying and are they handling it properly and how much of a delay was there between the crisis and the first commentary and are they providing value, are they providing solutions? So one of the first things I would say is to have some sort of update on your website. Again, if there's a crisis that's impacting your operations, your day-to-day business or the health of your employees or your customers or your members, to let people know that you're aware of it and that you're working on it. And so in my case, in a very, very small example, I put a banner on my website basically saying that, yes, we're offering virtual training during the COVID-19 pandemic and, email me for more information. It's a very, very small thing, but it's just, you want people to know that you are aware that the game has changed a little bit and that you are able to pivot or to be agile and to help with them. And it's about minimizing speculation as well. If you leave a vacuum in a crisis, like let's say your organization is dealing with a crisis that it's big, it's in the media, it's on social media, and it's growing. One of the you're going to get asked to comment on it. I would say you should actually just take your phone and go to Twitter, go to Facebook, go to wherever your platform is and talk about your company's response and talk about what you're doing. If you don't do that, then other organizations are going to do it for you. So just because you leave a vacuum doesn't mean that nothing's going to be said. You're just going to lose your opportunity to put the first bulletin on the bulletin board. And then so someone else does it on your behalf. You lose your voice and then you're playing catch up because you're trying to respond to what's already been said, which I don't think is a great idea. One of the questions that I saw that was sent through is how do you say something? How do you come across without being superficial? How do you communicate in a way that's going to actually connect with your audience? And because you don't want to be tone deaf or miss the mark. And so to me, my biggest piece of advice is just to be genuine and just to be authentic. And I know those are words that are overused these days. The other thing that I would say that I think will help more is to leave the marketing department behind. One of the sort of Achilles heels that I see of a lot of organizations when they're trying to communicate with their audiences is they're trying to just tuck or weave a little marketing message in there, or they're trying to be too cute, or they're trying to make it do too much, or the virtue signaling tweet. I would say leave that all behind and just focus on adding 100% value to your audience. Think of who's my target audience? What are they thinking right now? What's keeping them awake at night? How can I assist them? How can I add value to them? And just focus 100% on that. And to me, that's the best way for you to be credible and to be authentic and to be genuine, not only in your operational response, but also in your communications response. So I think it bears sort of repeating or describing here that it's not enough for you to be making the right decisions in the boardroom from an operational perspective. There also has to be a parallel track where you're actually communicating that as well, letting people know that you're doing the right things and making the right decisions. That's where a lot of organizations, strangely, I find this so strange in 2020 that they think that just because they have a war room set up and they're doing all the right things and they've solved the crisis from an operational standpoint, they think that's enough. If the public doesn't see that you're doing it, if your employees don't see it, if your members and customers and suppliers don't see that you're doing it as well from a communication standpoint, then it's almost like you didn't do it. So you have to have both of those things going at the exact same time. This is pretty basic one, but I don't know how many organizations have gone through media training, which is kind of like my day job, or it was again before the pandemic struck. But it's funny that I saw someone yesterday from I forget what the organization was, but it was an organization that clearly would have had a media relations policy in place. It was the RCMP. It was related to the awful shooting out in Nova Scotia, and someone who works for the RCMP put out a Facebook post, heart-wrenching Facebook post, but talking about, people are blaming us for this, or we didn't do that, and blah, blah, blah. And from a human perspective, very touching, heartfelt post. From an RCMP perspective, that's the kind of stuff that you cannot have people doing. You cannot have employees in your organization writing posts on Facebook about internal decisions that are being made, because what you're going to end up having is conflicting messages. You're going to have your president or your executive director or a member of the board that says one thing on in the Globe and Mail, and then you have an employee, well-meaning, saying something different on Facebook. You cannot have that. So this is why it's important for us to have a media relations policy and to go through this kind of training when things are good, so that when the you-know-what hits the fan, everybody knows what to do. But everyone in your organization should know that in the event of a crisis, or in the event of any situation, if you're approached by a magazine, a blog, a TV show, that request should go through media relations, and then we figure out who the best spokesperson is. And for any given crisis, we want to have one spokesperson, not 3, not 4, not 5. I talked about the amygdala a few minutes ago, and that reptile part of our brain where we start making just sort of knee-jerk decisions, and it's all about survival, right? Our brain is there to help us survive. Our brain is not there to help protect your brand. So you have to almost override that primitive sort of thinking. And one of the first things that I see go out the door for, again, very intelligent, otherwise rational individuals is empathy. It's so funny that, if you took most people who have stuck their foot in their mouth from a media relations perspective in a crisis over the past 50 years, if you would have put them in a boardroom a week before the crisis took place, and you would have asked them, look, if a crisis were to affect your company, how would you respond? And what should you say? I guarantee that almost all of them would be able to say, well, you have to act quickly, you have to have empathy, you have to talk about what you're doing. They would all know the right things to do. But when it actually happens, your heart starts pounding, your breathing accelerates, you start sweating, you start freaking out, and you get that tunnel vision again. And empathy is the first thing to go out the door. So, I started my webinar here today saying, I hope everybody here is doing well from a health perspective. I hope you're all doing well. Like, that wasn't an accident. I have that as a note written on my page, because I realize it's easy for us to just kind of get rolling and get into the content. So you have to make empathy, and you can't build up to it. It has to basically be the first thing you do. Like, anytime your staff, your stakeholders are impacted or inconvenienced in any way, you need to start with empathy, and just sort of make sure we tick that box again in a genuine way. But if you don't do that, this is one of the biggest, it's binary. If you do it, you're going to help yourself respond to the crisis better. If you don't express empathy and concern, everything else looks a little bit suspect, even if you're doing all the right things. So just make sure that you're doing that. In the era of social media, one of the, I really love the fact that we have these free tools that you can go on your phone, write an update, hit publish, and you have the ability to communicate that to your target audience and potentially the world. I think of, and this is going to really date me, but I was working 20 years ago this spring. I was working in the town of Walkerton for that town's E. coli crisis, biggest water contamination crisis in Canadian history. 7 people died, 2,500 people were sick, and some of those people are still sick. We didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have social media. So our ability to communicate with the public was literally, I would go down to the radio station and I would beg them to put a public service announcement on the radio. And we would go around and be talking to people in the street, or we would talk updates in people's mailboxes at the post office. Like, these are the ways we had to communicate. And so I think a lot of us take for granted the ability that we have to communicate so quickly with our target audiences and to provide them with information as we have it. So I know that, I do talks at a lot of conferences for organizations like yours, and I know that a lot of us are not where we should be when it comes to using social media. And I would say that these are tools that I would really like you to embrace and figure out how to use, not only from a marketing perspective, which is we're going to get into next, but also from a crisis management perspective. Want to make sure that we are protecting our customer confidence. And this is going to sort of bleed into, again, the marketing piece we're going to talk about in a few minutes. One of the biggest, because the shock and awe component of this whole COVID-19 pandemic has started to wane. We're like 5 some weeks into it, into the serious lockdown mode. So companies are saying, how do we stay relevant? How do we stay on people's agenda? How do we do that in a way that's not going to look tone deaf or superficial? And of course, your employees as well. And we're going to talk about how do you make sure that you're communicating with them, because it's one of the audiences that a lot of organizations actually just forget about. They figure, they'll figure it out as we go. And I really want you to prioritize them as an audience. So if you have a crisis communications plan, amazing. You're one of the 5 or 6% of organizations that do. If you don't, there's good news. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. And you're not too late, right? Like just because we're in this macro crisis doesn't mean that there could be another micro crisis coming 3 weeks from now that's going to affect your operations. If there's one break in the supply chain or someone gets sick in your organization, you could be dealing with one of these. So my advice to everybody would be to go online and search for a crisis communications plan template. It doesn't, some of the best crisis management plans I've seen have been 7 or 8 pages long. They don't need to be long, but they just need to lay out all the different steps. So make sure it's as simple as possible. The more complexity you add in, the less usable I think it is. Make sure that everyone who's on your crisis management team has a copy of it, whether it's on their phone or in a file or in the cloud. Figure out who activates it. Is it the CEO who has their little gavel and says we are now in crisis management mode? Because you don't want Sheila in the mailroom saying there's a crisis when there maybe isn't one. Make sure that you have steps for internal and external communications, because those audiences need to be communicated with in lockstep. I have a friend yesterday in the healthcare space in Northern Ontario who lost her job as a nurse and found out about it in the media that morning. So found out in the morning that the organization was laying off a bunch of people, and got a call in the afternoon that she had lost her job. So that's, to me, not how to do it. Figure out who's responsible for what, because it's just better to have those decisions made ahead of time so you're not wasting time. And then which tools are you going to use? It's going to be Canada Newswire, YouTube, Twitter, Google, Facebook, whatever. I'm pretty platform agnostic, but I think we want to make sure that we have those things set up. It's not like, oh, we have a crisis. How do we start a Twitter page? We want to have those things built so that we can actually utilize them. When it comes to your messages or actual content, again, empathy is something that I keep coming back to, because if you look at any crisis that's been handled well in history, they got that right, and they got it right early, and then everything else operationally falls down underneath. Make sure you let people know what you're doing. If you know what the cause of the crisis was, let them know. If you don't know, let them know that you're investigating it. Let them know the timetable that you're working on. For example, I know that every day at 11:15 a.m., Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, does an update on TV. So he's letting people know that there's this reliable piece of information that he's going to be providing every day. This is one that I have a lot of, like, I was debating with someone on LinkedIn about this yesterday. So I think that, well, I know if your company's done something wrong, if your organization has made an error and it's become a large scale crisis, that I believe that you need to apologize. You might want to lock me in a room with your lawyer for half an hour so we can kind of duke it out, because historically, and nothing against lawyers, but lawyers are there to minimize risk, and they will say, if we apologize, we are saying we are responsible or liable, and that's going to turn into huge costs. I would say that the court of public opinion is almost as serious as the legal realm as well. And again, if you look at the companies who have made major mistakes and who have come out of it with their reputations intact, Maple Leaf Foods is one of those as well. I hate to keep going back to the well, but in 2008, they had that huge crisis. The company, Michael McCain, CEO, came out and actually apologized. And my understanding is it was against the advice of his lawyers. And so if you look just at the dollars and cents, forget the human suffering and tragedy. If you look at the dollars and cents, Maple Leaf Foods settled $27 million in class action lawsuit settlements on about $5 billion in revenues at the time. And so while it sounds like a large sum, I would say in respect of their revenues, it was actually just a drop in the bucket. And I would say that if they'd handled it not as effectively, there might have been much more dollars on the table. And then show people what you're doing to actually fix it, and doing the right thing, saying the right thing in parallel, in lockstep as you go through. And of course, make sure that you have spokespeople media trained. These are just a couple shots that from a session that I did last year, going through that rewiring of people's brains. How do you handle an interview? Get that camera, get a nice big camera with a light in their face, and ask them tough questions and critique them and grill them and put them through the ringer, so that everybody at the end of that day will be significantly better at handling media interviews than they were earlier in that day. So how should we be communicating with our employees right now? I would say that, every organization is going to be a little bit different, but first of all, make sure that you actually consider them to be an audience. Many organizations, again, they focus on their outbound customers and their sort of supply chain, and they focus their messaging on there, and they kind of forget about their employees. They are also concerned. They're also scared. They're also working from home. They're also concerned about losing their jobs. So Make sure that you are forthcoming and truthful and honest with your employees. And my biggest piece of advice, not knowing who is on the line and what your companies do and who you are, and hopefully we can hear more about that later. But I would ask you to accelerate the amount of communication you're having with your employees. So if you're talking to employees once a week, make it twice a week. If it was twice a week, make it 3 times a week. And make sure that you're checking in with them on an emotional level before you start. So before you say, hey, do you have that TPS report for me? How are you doing? How are your kids? I hope everything's going okay. Is there anything that I can help you with? Connecting on that human level will really go a long way. So be more frequent. And everything doesn't need to be a Zoom call these days. Like, we have telephones, you can call them up on the phone as well. I'm not going to tell you how to communicate, whatever makes sense. But like, I find that everybody wants to make everything a Zoom call these days, which I realize the irony of doing that on a webinar. And so the second most frequent question I've been getting over the past couple of weeks, the first one is crisis management. The second one is, how do we communicate with our customers? How do we handle marketing? Is there a way to do that? And so to me, this is a minefield. If this is handled poorly, you end up looking terrible, and I think it can actually do reputational damage. There was research done, and someone said, there was a comment that was sent in. I didn't know who sent it, but thank you for that. They said, what do people want to hear from us right now? What do people, like our customers, members, stakeholders, what do they want to hear from us right now? And so the closest thing I can give you is that I saw research about a week ago. I forget who it was done by, but they said the number one thing people want from your organization is something that will help them in their day-to-day life, which might not be in tune with what you actually do as an organization. So, it's not about marketing. It's not about flyers, brochures, coupons. It's about, like, how can you help them in their day-to-day life? So you have to change your mindset a little bit. And again, role play, like think or call them up and ask them, talk to 5 clients of yours or customers and say, how can we help you right now? What are your biggest issues? What are your biggest challenges? And then create content that addresses those and share that with them. And you'll have to experiment and tinker a little bit, but again, leave the marketing department at home. This is not the time for that. Anytime that I'm sitting there watching TV and the commercials, they started a couple weeks ago. You see healthcare workers with the lines on their faces and they're looking all sad. And it's like, in these unprecedented times, Volkswagen or Subaru or Burger King is here for you. And it's a little too soon. So this is a tweet that I found last week. I like how ads have gone from buy a Toyota to this is a difficult and uncertain time for us all, buy a Toyota. And so, we are all going to have whiplash from this, and this is going to become very old very fast. And there are a lot of advertising people around North America coming up with campaigns that try to exploit and pinpoint those emotional centers. And I would say, please, 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 please don't do that. We're going to talk about some best practices, like things you can aspire to, but I'd like to lay out also a cautionary tale before we do. And I've seen some examples of this, and we're going to see more. Don't let your organization, your business, your employees be caught on the wrong side of history when it comes to the wrong sort of messages or marketing. The first one that comes to mind for me, and this was again a while back, so it's like March 21st, so it's a month ago. EB Games, I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but it's a store. Well, if you have Teams, you're familiar with EB Games, but they have stores in malls and strip malls where they sell video games. And so this is a model that has been under attack from streaming and online game purchases for a while. So this is the game version of Blockbuster to Netflix. So the company's been operationally under intense pressure over the past number of years. And I would say that 12, 24 months from now, this company's not going to be around anymore as a virtual brick and mortar store. And so they had 2 games coming out on a specific Friday. And everyone was telling them, and this is like 8 days after the NBA shut down operations in the NHL and everybody else. So they had 2 games coming out, and everyone was telling them, put it off, do it online, social distancing, whatever. And the CEO said, screw it, we're going to have everybody line up. And they had the shots of these huge lines, and everybody lost their minds. And Doug Ford was ripping them a new one on the news. And the company just took a killing. And again, I'm Simon Cowell. I go in and I'm reading through the comments on Twitter, and they were just vicious comments attacking this company. So there's a ton of negative coverage. The company ended up switching gears and sort of going back and apologizing, but by that point it was too late. They took a ton of heavy criticism. And so to me, it was that fight or flight thinking. The serious threat to the business superseded the sort of the pandemic threat, and it was a wrong decision that was made. So doing the right thing to me is always the right thing when it comes to that. So this is what I referenced a little earlier, Pusateri's. It's a high-end food store in Toronto, and they got killed in the media for selling Lysol wipes for $29.99 per package, and it looks like a huge markup. And so again, Twitter went bananas and started doing its job and started attacking the company. And so the company came up with this apology that was not a very good apology. I think the first few words are like, while it's no excuse, and then they provided an excuse and tried to say that it was a pricing error. Anyway, I don't know the intent of the individuals, whether it was an error, but I know that it wasn't handled well. The apology was not done well because it had excuses and it had qualifications. If you're going to apologize, just apologize. And I found it very fascinating that the company pulled its Twitter page down and locked it out. So that the screenshot is from yesterday. And again, this is almost a month later. So the reputational damage, again, to this company will be huge. So I don't want us to be like those folks. And I don't know if anyone saw this one the other day. And again, these are 3 of dozens and dozens and dozens of examples. But there's a Calgary coffee shop that was, the whole coronavirus issue, they took offense to being told kind of what to do, and so they sent out a meme using Hitler, and it was very poorly received. So this company's getting killed as well. So when and what should we communicate from a marketing perspective? The one way that I would answer that is to say, are we adding value? Are we adding value to our audience, or are we not? And I'm going to give you some examples of what some organizations have done, just to get your mind going, the creative juices flowing a little bit, to say, what are some different things that we could do that would be interesting for our audiences? I would really focus not so much on selling, focus on helping. And so there's a theme from a marketing perspective that's coming up here. People are not in buying mode. People are across the board. No one's sleeping well. Everybody's having crazy dreams. We all have our kids at home trying to do homeschooling, whatever that's turning out to be, which in my case, my kids' screen time is about 34 hours a day. And so from a communication standpoint, I'm looking at this through a very long lens. I'm not looking to make sales this week, next month. I'm looking to shape and enhance the brand of my company for 12 months, 24 months, 5 years down the road. And I'm going to show you again some examples of things that I'm actually doing, because I'm trying to not just tell other organizations what to do, I'm trying to eat my own dog food as well. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, because I really think that if you're creative, we have, again, the tools are free to use. And so it's just being creative and taking some ideas that other people are doing. So are you helping organizations? Are you providing advice, guidance, all those sorts of things? This is an actual checklist that I would ask you to use. And you don't need to be doing all of these things, but I think any piece of content that you're going to be sending out right now has to do at least one of these things. And that would be really the extent of my list. Are you entertaining them? And there are some fun things that we can do in this time. That would be, and I'm going to show you some examples of those that I think are ingenious. Are we informing people? Now, I'm aware that, the individuals we have here on the line today are from a whole range of different aspects of food services and restaurants and beverages and science and technology and academia. But, so many of the questions that people have today are about the supply chain, food, or will we have enough? I saw something about a cattle plant getting shut down or a slaughterhouse. Can I order takeout? It's Wednesday, right? It's like takeout Wednesday. Can I order food? What should I do? Should I wash it? Do I wash my hands? Is it safe? Is it not? So I believe there are about 100 different topics in there that you could pinpoint on and make little pieces of content about. Are you educating them, or are you benefiting your audience? So I want to give you some examples, which I think are best practices of what some organizations are doing right now. So there's a company in the United States called Cardinal Spirits. And this is a company that makes alcoholic beverages. Obviously, their business has been impacted in a negative way during this pandemic. And one of the things they've done is they've decided, and we've seen a lot of organizations do this, they've decided to pivot to making hand sanitizer. So that's one of the things they're doing with their equipment to try to be helpful in this time. But here's something ingenious that they've done. So first of all, by switching operations to hand sanitizer, they've had a kind of a win in the hearts and minds of the people in their community and their customers. It's an opportunity for them to show you what they're doing. And so they have these nice pictures and these little write-ups. But here's the ingenious part. And I think that a lot of restaurants could take a lesson from this as well. They said, here's what we need to sell. Every day they do this on Instagram. They said, here's what we need to sell to stay in business. And then they have a list, 30 bottles of spirits, 20 cocktails to go, 24 packs of, canned whatever. And so as they go through the day, their customers feel like they're a part of the team to keep these guys in business. And so they'll go through, and then once the company hits their targets for the day, maybe it's like 2:30 in the afternoon, they send out a note saying, okay, we've sold enough for today to keep ourselves in business. Go and support someone else in the community. So like from start to finish, it's just doing the right thing. And it's so counterintuitive to what a lot of organizations are doing, where they would say, yeah, keep those sales coming in. And I guarantee you that this company will be much better set reputation-wise, sales-wise, revenue-wise, 12 months from now because of what they're doing today. So to me, this is a great example that would ask you to think about, how could I deploy or employ something like this in my business? And this has to be my favorite. If you haven't seen this already, you're really missing out, and I encourage you to check it out. So the Getty Museum. Obviously, we are not allowed to go into museums right now. Who knows when we might be again. So the amount of money that they're losing is probably spectacular. And again, instead of just trying to be in crisis mode, they said, we challenge you to recreate a work of art with objects and people in your home. And they have a little list there. Choose your favorite artwork, find 3 things lying around your house, and try to recreate the artwork with those items. And so I'd just like you to take a look at the number of retweets and likes that this tweet has. It has 10,000, this is from a week ago, 10,000 retweets, 24,000 likes. And so these are some of the images that have been created over the past week. And again, look at the metrics and look at the numbers on these. 28 comments, 235 retweets, 3,800 likes. And some of these are hilarious. Like people are obviously going a little bit stir crazy. So it's giving people something to do, but it's totally on brand with the museum. And it seems silly and it seems superficial. This is ingenious marketing at the highest ninja level. I think this is just spectacular. Here's another one. And my personal favorite is this one. So again, think of ways that you could do this for your business. And it's not going to be silly for everyone. Maybe you go the educational route, maybe you go a different way, but think of how you can either entertain, inform, add benefit, add value to your audience. Leave the selling, leave the marketing off the table for now. Unless, someone asks you for proposal, I'm not saying don't send that in. And if you have someone also asked a question about samples, like, usually I would go in, I'd have some samples of things. I would go over them with a client, and they'd see them in the room and smell them and taste them. How do you do that today? You can't do that over Zoom. So I would say maybe you take the samples and send them over by courier, and then you go over them on a Zoom call with the person, or Skype or FaceTime or whatever. So it's not quite the same, but it's better than nothing at all. So told you I'd talk about what I'm doing for my business. And so this is what I've been doing. And again, so I've got the spare time on my hands of like, how can I actually create content that will help some organizations so that I can have my business be better positioned 6, 12, 24 months down the road. So about 25 days ago, I sent out a tweet saying, starting today, I'm going to be sharing a crisis management tip every day for the next 365 days on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And so I had this little video that's pinned to my my Twitter page if you go there. And this is me actually at those conferences asking people, do you have a crisis management plan in place? And then you see that there's only 5 or 6 people. And so I've created the need for crisis management tips. And then every day I've been sending one out. These are just 2 examples of the 25 that I've sent out so far. And I've purposely clipped my view on LinkedIn. Like normally, if you looked at that, you wouldn't be able to see how many views a post has received, but I wanted you to see the number of views, because like I wouldn't be able to buy an ad that would get this kind of traction right now. So again, it's on brand with me from a crisis management and a media training standpoint. I'm providing value with no selling at all. It's just, here's some value. I hope it helps you. Have a great day. And I'm doing it. I'm committing to do it for a year. So, you have crisis tip number 2, to shut down rumors and speculation, which is something we talked about today. 1,413 views. Real empathy can't be faked, can't be read from a teleprompter, blah, 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 2,150 views. So as of yesterday, I've had 25 posts go out, and they've received over 25,000 views on LinkedIn, and a lot of comments, and a couple of webinars have been set up. I've got a call with a woman tomorrow afternoon who I don't know at all, who saw one of these tips and sent me a note and said, hey, do you want to chat about doing a webinar for our organization? So I showed this to you as an example of, it's going to be different for every company. But instead of viewing it from your marketing department out, view it from your customers in, and say, What is it that's bothering them? How can I add value? What are some of the things that I can do to make their life a little bit easier, to make them worry a little bit less, to entertain them, make them laugh, make them forget their troubles for a little bit? That's kind of on brand. And so it's going to take some strategy, might take some coffee, caffeinate yourself and spend some time and brainstorm with your team. But this is a time when companies are really, the ones who are smart about this can really set themselves apart from the others. So, I keep hitting the same themes and trying to say the same thing different ways. I really believe that helping and sharing valuable content are the only ways for you to set yourself apart and to communicate with your audiences during the situation right now. The hard sell, I think, is people just, it's superficial, and people don't want that right now. We're not in a mode to receive sales messages. So I want to show you a couple of examples, and maybe some of these folks you are familiar with, or maybe some of these individuals are actually on the line today. But I went into your industry and I wanted to find out, what are some people doing that's kind of like on brand with what I'm talking about today. And so I saw this one, innovation under lockdown. I kind of turned my kitchen at home into a laboratory. So you have someone who would usually be doing this out in the world in a lab is stuck at home. And so turn the kitchen into a lab and sort of turn that into content, which I think is ingenious. And here's just a quote from there. She talked about the process, turned her kitchen into a lab so she can test different ingredients, talking about her Thermomix and how she does different things. And so to me, this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. And media outlets will accept this. I would even go further and say, start a YouTube channel, start a YouTube show or a podcast, some kind of I know there's enough podcasts out there, but I really believe that podcasts are something else that you can add value. And it doesn't need to go viral. You might have 400 listeners. You might have 172 listeners in the entire world. But as long as you can get that content to those listeners, I just really believe that these content plays are really, really important. Here's one of the questions I've been seeing all over the place. Is it safe to cook for people I don't live with during the coronavirus lockdown? Food delivery, what do we do? What are best practices? We all saw that dork at Tim Hortons spraying the cup and turning it around and apologizing for it. So a little bit of overkill, and that didn't go well. So where people have questions, and again, what your organization does, this might not make sense for you, but I'm just trying to give you food-based examples that would be relevant that you could actually utilize. This is a great quote that I saw from that story. The food safety community doesn't really see issues with cooking for other people. Doesn't mean you can forego sanitation and hygiene. People should be paying attention to them, blah, 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 blah. So great examples of what could be done. And here's another one that I've been seeing in the past week or so. Coronavirus crisis endangers meat supply to grocery producers. And so a lot of questions around this. Is it true? Is it false? What does it mean? And so again, if your company has something to say in this conversation, go in there. So just 3 examples, not limited to this. I think there could be hundreds of pieces of content that you can create on this that would be, and it doesn't matter if it's written word, a picture like the Spirits company did on Instagram, it could be a video, it could be a 2-minute podcast, it could be a half-hour interview show. To me, that's the kind of information that I would want to be sharing with my audiences right now, and that will be huge to me. So I really, really believe that social media is the most effective way to communicate with your audiences right now. Now, you may have an email list, or you might have another way to communicate with your audiences. I'm not saying not to do that. Those are actually very, very important options. But if you're not on social media, this is the time to figure it out. There is a YouTube video for everything. So you might have a communications team. You might have a team that you can actually go to and have them help you with this. If you don't, go to Google or go to YouTube and say, how do I start a, or how do I make a, and there will be content there to show you how to do it. If making great content was easy, every organization would be doing it. It's actually difficult to do it the way that some of these organizations we've done today, because it takes thinking, it takes strategy, it takes selflessness, it takes self-awareness, and it takes practice. So figure out who's doing it well and try to borrow or copy their ideas and leverage those for your own organization. In everything that you do, make sure that you're actually genuine and caring about your audience. That can't be faked, and that really does come through. Like hopefully this comes through here today, that I'm actually trying to provide one piece of value to every person on this webinar today that you can actually go and deploy for your organization. If you get more than that, great, but I want to have at least one for everybody. Leave the hard selling for after the pandemic, and then just don't be afraid. It doesn't need to be perfect. Send something out, get some feedback, and then try it again tomorrow, and then try it again the next day, and try it again the next day. Now, one of the I'll just before we wrap up, and again, if you have any questions, please send those in. I'm happy to answer as many as we can in a sort of a rapid fire fashion. a lot of organizations have said, look, we're not doing Twitter, we're not starting a YouTube channel, we're not going to have a podcast. And like, I'm not here to twist your arm to say you're going to do that. Some people say, we like email, we've been doing email since 1995, we want to keep doing email. But is there a way to make email more interesting? And so this is an option that I would actually like to provide. So there's a company called BombBomb, as you can see the name, video. And I think there's different providers like this. Vidyard is another one from Waterloo, Vidyard. But what this company allows you to do is to shoot a short video and to send it to your audience by email. So if you have an email that you want to send out to your staff, or an email that you want to send out to your mailing list or your customers or whatever, you have the ability to take a camera like the one I'm using today, or take your phone and record a quick video. What this software does, though, is it compresses the video to a very, very, very small size, which is really important because the videos we're taking on our phones are just massive. If you try to email that video to someone, it would probably break both of your computers. So it takes it and it just puts it right in the body of the email. So they open up the email, video's right there. All they do is click and it plays right in the box. So it's super easy. It's a way for you to connect with people on a more just human level. They see a face, they can actually see you. And it's just really, really easy from an IT perspective to do. So I don't know if that's for everybody. Some of you might be already doing it, but just something that I wanted to share. This to me is not the time for selling. It's the time for storytelling. So what are the stories about your organization? What are the stories about your mission, your mandate? If you go deep, I was doing a session like this for the PGA of Canada last week. And so you have all these golf courses and golf pros around the country who aren't able to do their jobs. And so I said, what you should be doing, if you're a golf pro, have a video golf tip of the day. And a couple of days later, I saw a guy out in his yard in the snow, and he's showing people how to do a certain chip shot in the snow in his yard. I got tons of comments. And so just tinker, experiment, tell stories. There was another golf course that I did a talk there last year, and I was going through, it was in New Brunswick, and I noticed that, I forget the name of the course, but I saw there was a plaque on the wall that George Bush Sr. had golfed there one day, and he had a little autograph and stuff. I'm like, that's a story. Take your camera, take a picture, and have someone talk about the day that George Bush golfed at your golf course. So every organization has stories. This is the time for you to tell those with a lens to how can you help your audience? How can you add value to them? So that's everything that I had prepared that I wanted to chat about. We've got just under 15 minutes left. I would love to answer your questions if you have any of those. So please fire away. And again, I hope there was something of value in there for you. If you have a question that we're not able to answer today, you can send it through to the organizers, or you can hit me up on Twitter or whatever. But anyway, keep those questions firing in, please.
Warren, it's Constance here. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent. Well, we only had, it was more of a comment than anything at the very beginning, but good examples. And you'd mentioned one of the crisis communications around the Tylenol incident, but I don't know, do you remember the ice storm that took place in Quebec?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and that impacted Quebecers. It impacted, I think, folks in the Ottawa-Gatineau region. Do you have any recollection of how that crisis was managed, or was it managed well?
So I do remember the ice storm crisis. I was working at the Ontario Clean Water Agency at the time. I don't know if everyone knows who that is, but they're an operator of water and wastewater treatment facilities throughout Ontario. And so the lens that I was viewing the crisis through, so this massive ice storm that shut down power in the entire area. And what I remember is that the Ontario Clean Water Agency was one organization that took a lot of their individuals and a lot of their generators and sent them off to Quebec. And so to me, it was a version of this. How can we help? How can we add value? It was not, they weren't making any money from it. It would actually cost them a lot of money to do it. But they just said, what's the right thing for us to do? But did we write newsletter stories about it? You bet we did. Did they have media relation stories about it? Yes, we did for sure. So these things, altruism is certainly there, but then from document what you're doing, talk about it. I'm not familiar with it enough to comment on certain how politicians handled it. I think in general, I just remember a lot of organizers and volunteer firefighters and people rallying around it. And so that was my response. And I thought that those, even though these organizations weren't directly impacted by it and they're in a different province, it would have been very easy for them to sit there and twiddle their thumbs in Ontario. But they got in their vehicles and they took those generators and they went to help. And so that's the piece that I remember from that. And I thought that was handled extremely well.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it was a really good parallel to what is going on now, obviously in a much more, micro way. But
Yeah,
you had received actually the little survey we had done prior to the
yeah.
event. Somebody had asked a question, and you may have covered it, but I'm going to ask it again. And oh, I
Hmm.
should mention, by the way, everybody, this webinar is being recorded. So some of the you can go back and rewatch everything, get some of the tips and tricks that Warren shared. But the question is, what are the pros and cons of saying something versus saying nothing? So
Hmm.
that's a question I
So,
think I'm wondering
yeah.
myself.
Sure. So it's a big question. Like it depends. It depends what's happening with your organization. Are is it adding value? Like to tell you that I haven't sent out I've worked with hundreds of companies. I haven't sent out a blanket email to everybody in these difficult times. Blah blah blah. Hope you're all well. Like these emails, and we've all received dozens of them. They don't say anything. So I think a lot of organizations see, oh, my duct cleaning company sent me an email saying that they're thinking of me in these difficult times. Maybe we should be doing that too. So I think there's a lot of copycat people sending stuff out. I haven't sent that out because it's not helping anybody. Now, I've had a lot of one-on-one discussions with clients on the phone who had to reschedule sessions, or is there a way that I can provide content for them, or they have a question for me. To me, it's really like, am I adding value or am I not? And so just because Canadian Tire and Burger King and Wendy's and Midas Muffler are sending out blanket emails to everybody, should we be doing it too? I would say not necessarily. Now, is there something operationally that your audience needs to hear about? I would say then, okay, let's figure out how we're going to do that. Maybe it's an email, maybe we call them up, maybe we do a video. I don't know. But like, I don't just communicate for the sake of it. I would really want there to be some sort of reason, some sort of value. So I could answer it more definitively if I knew the circumstances of the situation. But I'd say if there's a crisis, we talked for about 20 minutes about crisis management today. If your organization is dealing with a crisis, then I would say absolutely you should be speaking to. You don't have to go and call up CBC, but I would sort of say certainly you need to communicate with your audiences, with your customers, the people impacted. So just to repeat the same thing for a fourth time, like if you're adding value, then I think you have a way to communicate. If you're not adding value, then it's better just to sit on the sidelines and wait it out.
All right, I'm just checking to see if I have any other questions. It's a very quiet group today, Warren.
Mm.
um, so, and actually one of the really great takeaways, by the way, I thought, and it was just the one slide where you had the little checklist of, is it helping or entertaining,
Oh, inform,
informing,
entertain, yeah.
benefiting. And I think if anything, that one thing people can take away, and if they can apply that, because I think the concern is, is over communicating, being
Yeah.
tone deaf, and not necessarily saying the right things. So
Mm-hmm.
given that we don't have any more questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you now on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology and Food in Canada magazine. So we thank you for your informative and, as
Thank you.
always, entertaining presentation. I wanted to
Not sure how
remind
entertaining it
everybody,
was.
I want to remind everybody that we are hosting webinars every Wednesday for the foreseeable future, including the following speakers. So next week, April the 29th, we have Cher Meriwether of Provision Coalition. May 6th, we have Dr. Savin Charlebois of Dalhousie University. May 13th, we have Dana McCauley of New Venture Creation Research Innovation Office, University of Guelph. And we have others as well. So please visit our website and you will find those, and please register for our coming events. And I wanted to thank everybody, and of course, Warren, for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Take care.